Well, the U.S. economy actually is doing okay. The figures for the last quarter have been published, and it looks like we're growing at 3%, which is much better than it was expected. However, the long-term, the long-term trend, which is about, unless this changes, which is about 2% or so a year, is good, but not exceptionally good. Now, the question is, to what extent does President Trump take credit of an economy that's doing okay? Well, if we look at how the economy was doing last year, before Mr. Trump became president, it was doing pretty much the same. So is this about the new president or about trends which go on regardless of who is president? At the moment, there's not much that Mr. Trump has managed to put in place in terms of new policies that would justify a change in economic performance. Certainly, to his credit, he has enacted a lot of deregulation, which is positive because that means that business going forward will have fewer rules and regulations to worry about as business people, go about in running their affairs. The next challenge for Mr. Trump and for the Republican Party, which dominates both the House and the Senate, will be tax reform. Tax reform has been talked about, has been announced as a plan, but nothing has been done in terms of changing legislation. So good news, so far good news. To what extent can Mr. Trump take credit for the good performance of the economy? A bit too early to say.
Okay, the second question, what's your opinion on Trump tax reform call?
Yeah. The tax reform is definitely needed in the United States. The last time we had a major tax reform was in 1986. Another Republican was in charge, but that was Ronald Reagan. We're talking decades ago. Mr. Trump has announced, obviously it was part of his campaign program as well, that he wanted to promote definitely major tax reform. Unfortunately, at the moment, we lack details. Some announcements have been made, and certainly, he's touching the right chords by promoting cutting down rates for corporations. The United States has one of the highest corporate taxation rates in the world, which clearly does not make America very competitive vis-a-vis other countries, even including our neighbor Canada or other countries in Europe or whatever that have much lower tax rates. That becomes a competitive disadvantage for American corporations. Of course, many of the large corporations can figure out a way to game the system, meaning to pay less than the nominal rate. But the smaller companies don't have such a luxury and therefore pay a lot more. The question is, how can you combine cutting down corporate tax rates and reforming individual tax rates, and at the same time making sure that tax cuts do not increase the national debt? Because taxation is what the federal government takes in to pay for all the federal government expenditures. We have already a huge national debt, $19 trillion. Every year we add to that debt via large, significant budget deficits, which need to be financed by borrowing. The question is, can Mr. Trump and his allies in the Congress figure out a way to have tax reform which is good for business and good for individuals, which is also equitable, which is to say that not only the super rich gain by seeing their taxes cut, but also the little guy, the poorer people take some tax relief, and at the same time making sure that cutting taxes, which means revenue, does not increase the deficits and, as a consequence, the national debt. That's really, really difficult. And taxation and tax reform is extremely complex in the United States because there are so many different interests involved. Even if you consider the current regime, many sectors get special relief, special set-asides, special credit for this or that and the other. And clearly, a tax regime which is very complicated. Unfortunately, the American tax regime is very complicated, is heaven for the tax lawyers because they make money by advising clients on how to pay less. If you simplify the system, of course, all these people who gain money by advising and counseling, or you do this, you pay less of that, you get a rebate, you get a refund, you do that, etc. That universe of people who add nothing to the economy but make money because they know how to navigate complexity, that would have to go away. Now the question is, can Mr. Trump, given also some of his problems, let's not forget these congressional investigations, the special counsel, etc., still maintain the focus and the alliance in Congress? He needs the House of Representatives. He needs the Senate on his side in order to put together a credible tax reform plan that would pass both houses and that he could eventually sign. This is important and necessary. However, will he be able to do it? Well, we shall see. We're at the very beginning of this process. The real story is that racism and racially motivated groups in America, we know, are very small. We still have, unfortunately, the Ku Klux Klan, which is a heritage that goes back 100 years, when it was really a powerful force throughout the South of the United States. Now it's a few hundred people here and there. Now, does it mean that it doesn't exist? No, it still exists. Are there white supremacist groups who believed somehow that the white race is endangered in the United States? Yes, they do exist. Are there neo-Nazi factions here and there? Yes, they are. Are they very large? No. That's the reality. On the other hand, an incident like this event in Charlottesville in Virginia, unfortunately, brings it all back. And the president has been accused by his political opponents that he was not forceful enough in condemning the perpetrators. He said generically that this was political violence in general, and there's responsibilities, at multiple sides, which really means I condemn the supremacists, but I also condemn somehow those who went out there to oppose them. That didn't go down very well, because it seemed, according to some, that he was in effect kind of glossing over, and that he didn't really want to charge the white supremacists. And why wouldn't he want to do that? According to his political opponents, is because, sadly, some of these people voted for him, okay? Although, again, let's keep this in context. These are nationwide, very small numbers. Well, look, this problem of North Korea is bad. We've known about it now for more than a decade. If we go back to the Clinton administration, so we're talking about the 1990s, North Korea was already a big problem because, correctly, American intelligence and American administration concluded that North Korea was engaged in a process leading to the acquisition of nuclear weapons, and down the line, the development of ballistic missiles, which are necessary to deliver a warhead, a nuclear warhead from A to B. And B, unfortunately, at some point could become the United States. Not much has happened in terms of successful outcomes of negotiations over many, many years and across different administrations, Democrats and Republicans. What we have now is a new milestone. In fact, two milestones, it seems. The North Koreans have demonstrated the capability of developing an intercontinental ballistic missile. Without getting too technical, this means that they can hit the United States. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point. In parallel to that, according to US intelligence, they seem to have developed the capability of miniaturizing a nuclear warhead so they would fit on the tip of the missile. So with that, you have the two critical components of a potentially successful nuclear attack: the missile, which is the delivery system, and the warhead. That escalates the issue by many, many dimensions, in many, many dimensions, which really means that the moment in which the North Koreans would be able to attack, God forbid, the United States is becoming much closer. So what are the options here for the Trump administration? Frankly, no good options at all. Has America, in principle, the capability to attack the North Korean nuclear facilities, launch pads, missile silos, and other related pieces of the North Korean nuclear program? I would say, in principle, yes. However, this would unleash global war, I mean, not global, but certainly a regional war, because we know very well that North Korea holds the capital of South Korea, Seoul, hostage by having deployed not nuclear weapons, but very conventional, however very powerful, long-range artillery. In other words, the entire city of Seoul is within the range of thousands, literally, of guns that can be fired from North Korea, and you can expect that this will be the first thing that the North Koreans do in case of an American attack. On top of that, you've got China, which is, in a kind of a strange situation here, not exactly formally an ally of North Korea, but certainly the country that has allowed North Korea to continue to somehow prosper, even though it's a poor country, but to stay alive, to have some kind of an economy, and the proceeds of this economy in North Korea have been invested, as we know, in this nuclear program. What is China going to do? The Trump administration would like them to say, hey, to go to their friends, so to speak, in Pyongyang, in the capital of North Korea, and say, guys, enough, stop this. We don't want you to do this anymore, and you got to freeze or give up your nuclear weapons. But this would be very convenient for Washington, but what's in it for the Chinese? And this is where it gets really complicated, because it's not really clear what the American negotiating position would be with China. In other words, if it is understood that America needs China to solve somehow this problem, what is Washington offering to China that China doesn't already have? This becomes really complicated. As I said, there are really no good solutions. Of course, if we take this from a completely different perspective, but this was something that would require years, the United States Army and, well, let's say armed forces in general, are engaged and have been engaged now for decades in what are called anti-ballistic missile program. That is, defenses against a ballistic missile attack, all right, from any country. The problem is that there's been significant underinvestment in this critical area of defenses against a nuclear attack, and therefore, at the moment, America has some systems, but they are limited and not, quite frankly, not very reliable. So an insurance policy that the United States government should absolutely buy today is to invest heavily in ballistic missile defenses that in the future would be able to neutralize a nuclear attack. Now, of course, this can take a long time, and many people say, hey, but this doesn't take care of the problem now. Well, no, it doesn't, because we're not ready for it. But if we wait even longer, then we will never be ready. So that's another angle to this, because if we had effective ballistic missile defenses, then the North Korean nuclear threat would mean nothing, because we would be able to shoot down those missiles.